we're actually going to begin the program now, and I want to officially welcome you to this program called How Elders Can Live Happy, Fulfilled Lives During the Pandemic. And I will tell you that we had originally scheduled this program. I know, Katharine, we were trying to remember, but it was on April 26th. It was supposed to be on April 26th. And obviously we had to cancel the program when we lost control, when the pandemic happened. But we've been thinking and wanting to bring Katharine to us for a very long time. And so let me do a little bit of an introduction of Katharine Esty. Katharine is a member of First Parish in Concord, and we have some friends here from First Parish in Concord. And the rest of the group is from First Church in Belmont, where I work as the Adult Programs Director. And I have to say that personally, I've known Katharine for a long time, and but I've learned so much more about her when I read the book. And I will say to you that, in fact, the book is a wonderful thing to have in your possession. In fact, I was going to hold it up and show you the book, but I loaned it to someone. I don't know who has it, but I can't show you the book title, but I do believe that every one of us should have a copy of the book. Katharine, by way of introduction, Katharine is a social psychologist, and she's also a practicing psychotherapist. She is the mother of 4 boys, which that in itself should give her a few medals in passing. She also is an activist for aging well, and I think that is something that we need to learn about, and I think she will share with us the parts of her life that she has spent doing that work. And so she's also an expert on family dynamics. So I hope as you listen to her that you will jot down some questions, because I think being in Katharine's presence is a wonderful thing. She is full of joy and goodwill. And so without further ado, I would like to turn this program over to Katharine Esty.
Well, thank you very much, Lillian. And I am just delighted to be here and to be talking about aging well, which is what's on my mind these days and really my mission. So, and I think since we're talking about aging well, it makes sense that I, with full disclosure, tell you all that I am 86. So that gives me the credentials to talk about being an elder. And I think now we'll, Ed, the next slide, please. Now here, Lillian has started introducing you, but some of the roles that I played, it is true that I'm a psychotherapist and I am still working, which makes me unusual, but not so unusual these days to be still working. I'm a widow and a grandmother, and my husband died 5 years ago. And the last 2 years, I've had a boyfriend, so named Peter, and so that's a new event in my life. I had a diversity and strategic planning consulting firm for 20 years. So I was a psychotherapist and had a firm, and then went back to that. And I've written some books along the way, but this book is recent. It just came out about a year ago, and I don't know about Happiness Guru, as we'll be talking about happiness, because that is one of the major themes of my book, of what I discovered. So I'm going to start by telling you how I came to write this book. It was when I turned 80. I was in somewhat of a funk. My husband, John, was on dialysis. I had moved to a retirement community and I was feeling too young to be there. I had a few problems myself, medical problems. And the thing that sort of set me off was I went hiking with some of my grandchildren up a little mountain that I'd hiked for 40 years. And I actually fell a little bit, and then I just couldn't make it to the top. And that was the moment I sat down and thought, oh no, that, kind of feeling like life was going to be a decline, and, that I was downhill. I wasn't going to make it up the mountain. In fact, I was going to be going downhill from there on in. And after a few months of being in that funk, I woke up one day and said, well, there must be something I could learn about being old and what people are doing. Maybe others have some ideas that I haven't gotten, because all my being a psychotherapist was suddenly not helping me. I was in a funk just like many other people. So I decided I'd do some research about what it was like to be in your 80s. And that turned out to be quite hard, because people don't write about the 80s. Nobody had written a book much about 80s. They write from 65 to 100, and the generalizations are just that. They don't hold true. And so it was even hard to find out how many 80 somethings there were, not 90 somethings, not 70 somethings. But I did find out and get going on the research, and I want to share a few of the things I found out. Next slide. So what I found out by going to first I went just to the internet, that there are just about 11 million people in their 80s in this country, but that is more than there's ever been. I mean, there never used to be anything but a handful of people in their 80s. Life expectancy, you may know this, is 79. But just in our childhood, my childhood, it was 65. So that's 14 years that have been added to the average life. And it's interesting, in Thomas Jefferson's time, the average life expectancy was 37. So we've made a lot of progress. One of the things I didn't know is if you actually make it to 80, men have 7 years of life expectancy, and women have another additional 9. I think that was a new fact to me, and sort of made me think, wow, if I have 9 years, that could be a lot of years. And that's just on average. And I also discovered that our life expectancy at 79 is by far not the best in the world. Hong Kong and Japan both have 84 years as life expectancy. And we obviously have something as a country to learn how to make a more hospitable environment. Next slide, please. So when I got going, after I got the facts, I thought I wanted to find out how old people were seen. And I decided that if I was going to really get information that mattered, I couldn't go to books anymore. I would need to do my own research. And I wanted to interview people that were in their 80s and find out what life was really like, because I was beginning to see that things were different today, and certainly different than my grandparents' day, where 2 of my grandparents spent their last 10 years in wheelchairs and in bed. So I started interviewing people, and I found out that there are some negative stereotypes that people cling to in their minds. Not everybody in fact, very few people think about growing old with joy. It's still kind of, people dread it. People try to be young. And some of the beliefs that I learned from the people I interviewed that still are alive and well, even though they're misinformed in many cases and outdated. But the common beliefs that negative beliefs that are circulating still is that you can't teach an old dog new tricks, that people continue to think that people in their 80s, say, or people that are really elders, would be slow, frail, and sick. They continue to believe old people aren't interested in sex, that old people are on the whole grouchy and grumpy, that they're set in their ways and can't change, and that they're often worried and depressed. So I found out that almost each one of those is certainly not universally true. Next slide. So what I did find, and I interviewed 128 people in their 80s over like a 3-year period, and I interviewed them at length. And I started out with my retirement community in Concord. I interviewed some people at First Parish. Then I moved on to the senior center and nursing homes where people were not well. And then I branched out to the New England states, and I went to California, and I went to New Orleans and Ohio and Pennsylvania and a few other places. And then about half of these interviews I did in person, some of these in these other states. But then I started as I went on, I did more in other states and on the phone. And I really tried to get a diverse group of people. There, have people that were Black and white, Hispanics, different ethnic groups, people at different economic levels. But it is loaded, the people I interviewed, with people that were flourishing. So it's not a random sample. It's not a typical sample, but and I didn't, I have some people that were at the bottom of the economic ladder, but it's certainly not weighted that way. And what I found in the book was, for the book, was just astounding. It was stunning to me, because nobody talks about old age as something to look forward to, or that there's lots to look forward to. The biggest umbrella finding that I had was that old people, by my sample, I asked every single one of them, if you had to rate your happiness on a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate it? And these were people in nursing homes and people that made $20,000 a year. There were people that didn't have a lot of resources.
All right.
Turn up your volume.
Oh, okay.
You don't you can get it directly from.
Can you hear me now? Is anybody can't hear me? Anyway, so the biggest finding was of my research was that the average of all of the people that I talked to, there were only about 8 or 9 out of the 128 that didn't give themselves an 8 or a 9 in terms of happiness. It turns out that there are a bunch of things that happen as you age, and so nobody's expecting to be happy. And so it's unexpected, but that it's fairly universal that people feel much better and are much happier than they ever anticipated. So what are some of the reasons that they're happier? I mean, what lies behind it? Because that's just and the first thing I think it's kind of obvious is that modern medicine has changed the ball game completely. Most elders are pain-free and lead active lives. I mean, think of us, what medicine has done for us. We have new hips and new knees and new shoulders and new skin, and we have, have got new heart parts to our hearts, and they've made big, much improved in the chances if you have cancer. So modern medicine has really meant that today aging is very different from just 30 years ago. If you think about it, when I was a child, we didn't have drugs available. The experts say that today, most 80-year-olds, almost way more than half, could work part-time if they wanted to. I mean, they're healthy enough. It's just it's not an expectation. We usually think now, we still have the expectation, 65, you get off, it's time to retire. The other big thing that's happened in the last 20 years is the research on aging brains. And I don't know how much you all know about this, but it's really been somewhat of a revolution. I grew up hearing that you lose brain cells every day, and that and especially if you have an alcohol drink, you lose brain cells every day. And so I kind of had the impression that by the time you got to be 80, there'd be nothing, like an empty balloon, there'd be nothing in it. But what we found out is that elders very much have a brain that can continue to learn and develop. And it also is less stressed, worried, and angry than less old brains. That the first thing is that something happens in the aging brain that kind of tamps down the extremes of emotion and worry. And you can probably see it in yourself if you think of couples you've known that maybe it was pretty rocky and there were some intense feelings going back. People, by the time they're in their 80s, most people, things are kind of much more harmonious, much more, and people gradually live. It's of less peaks and valleys and more kind of going along within a window. And this, the idea that we can learn and develop, we've learned that the brain can heal itself. We never knew that before. And that's called, you probably may know, neuroplasticity, that the brain is mobile that way and can recover from depression, can recover from different kinds of traumas. And so that it doesn't mean when, as you get old, that you can't have a full life because your brain is still clicking along. And I think that's, most people have not followed the brain research and haven't seen how it applies to them and their families. And even the bad news of dementia, which is everybody's nightmare, the rate of dementia is going down. And so in other words, people are getting older before they get dementia, which is, and that it's not getting, more people aren't getting it, well, except as we have more people, but the rate is not increasing. So the other good news that I found from my 128 interviews over those 3 years is that there are some gifts of old age that people are enjoying when they hit 80, and people hit 72, they enjoy it. I just didn't look at the 70s. They have time, and I think what we're all finding in COVID, we have more time, but that most older people have a chance to get off the rat race, get off the treadmill, and that they can, most people sort of are no longer striving. They're kind of able to be in the moment, relax, and be in the present in a way that they maybe never could do in their 50s or 40s or 60s or whatever. And that being old gives freedom. If you think about it, everyone I talk to, they'd say, well, it's great. I don't have alarm clocks waking me up anymore, which I did for 40 years. I can wake up and say, now, what do I feel like doing today? And they can, you can have whims now. Of course, that's changed with the pandemic, but it's still there in some sense. And I think what, you've probably heard the saying that youth is wasted on the young. But I think old age is not wasted on us elders, that we very much appreciate the privilege of being alive. And I think this happens, that just the sense of the horizon is short. We know that. And I think it gives that sense of being older, makes people treasure their daily life in a way that they never could before. And if you think, I mean, I see, just for a tiniest example, that you think back on your youth, and if you had a big pimple, you might stay home for a day or two and hide, because you just wouldn't want to face the world. And at my retirement community, if people have gotten some kind of cancer that they have to have a bandage to cover up the repair work, they come down to the dining room, and one person said to me, well, why skip dinner just because you have a bandage on your nose? I mean, we just have a certain sense of valuing our being alive, and the values change, and what's important rises to the top, and not the trivial matters. So that's all the good news today, but this lecture was not supposed to be just about the good news. It was supposed to be about COVID, right? So let's go on to the next slide. Well, how are, here, if you think about you might be saying just when I said that, COVID has changed everything. We've been locked up in our apartments or in our houses. We've not been able to be with our families. There's this raging surge of new cases. There's despair where everybody knows somebody who's had COVID. There's death and dying. It's not a good time. So how can you live a happy, fulfilled life when there's this pain all around us, the uncertainty all around us? I mean, isn't that too much? Shouldn't we just be waiting for it to be over? And as a psychologist, a social psychologist, I don't think we have to settle for that. I think we have to learn what we should have always learned, which is to live in the present. And there's an old poem that says, some people look before and after and pine for what is not. And I think we all can fall into that in the pandemic. But I think with a kind of an intentional life, this period can be lived fully and happily. So what are the guidelines? I've developed some guidelines that I think will take you a long way towards making the most of, granted, a very dark and difficult time. And I do think elders today, since they grew up in a period, World War II, depressions, they're used to not, elders are used to not having it perfect. So we've got a head start that way in terms of resilience. So here are the guidelines that I think are important to have a happy life. The first thing, and most people I don't think do this well, is we have to grieve what we have lost. I mean, we have lost being with our families at Thanksgiving, taking trips, seeing our grandchildren on a day-to-day basis, being out of our houses, having the freedom to go out to California. We all have, each one of us has a long list of losses. I think many of us don't actually see that we need to grieve them as well as we do the people that may have been passed away during this time, and that we need to take time to acknowledge that these are losses and to think about what they meant to us and what we did lose. And I think too many of us, us Yankees, us tend to think, well, I shouldn't complain because there's so many people in the world worse off than me that it's not right for me to have any sense of being not having a good deal. And I think that's the wrong side. As a psychologist, that's wrong, because our own losses are our losses. They need to be grieved just as much. Just not the fact that there's other people that are worse off in Bangladesh and New York City doesn't take away from our need to grieve. And if you skip over it, you can't skip over it. So I think that's a step that, and the losses will keep happening. So each one has to be grieved in its own way. And we can't skip over that work if we want to have a happy, fulfilled life. So, but once we've done that, once we have the habit of grieving the things that we lose, then we can have this more intentional life. And I think the first thing is to take control over what we can control. We can't control everything, but we can control our day. We certainly can control our day. And so what does that mean? It means that we may realize the choices we have, and we think about it, what we want to do, and we're kind of conscious of living our life and not just letting time roll by. One of the tools of taking control that works really well in a pandemic and is to have a routine. And some of us have routines, some of us don't, but I would recommend having a routine, creating it, and then making an enormous effort to stick to it. It does a number of different things. It structures your time. It it kind of tethers you, it kind of grounds you. And you also, if you wrote routines, most of us have an exercise routine. I know for me, I do stretching, I do exercise, I do meditation, and I do a weekly yoga class. All of those things are good for you and good for your mental health. And so if you stick to your routine, you have accomplished a lot by just doing that. And it just makes for a sense of well-being. So and it also makes you, gives you a feeling of being in control, which is, and you are in control of what you can be in control of. The other thing I think is clear to me is that the older people, the elders that flourish, all had identified a purpose. And in a time of pandemic, your purpose may have to shift. But I know in my retirement community, there are all kinds of purposes. I mean, some people have volunteer jobs. Some people, we've had somebody brought in a kiln, and there are now over 100 people that are making ceramics. Some of them, not all of them, but some of them, it's now their purpose. And we have people that are painters and people that are writers and people that study do their genealogy, and people that take photographs. I mean, there's no end to the purposes. But I think if to have a fulfilled life, there has to be something beside self-concern and, and having a focus that is something you truly enjoy is really an essential part of it. We all know this. There's been a lot in the press, the media, about the importance of being connected to friends and family. We know that we're social beings, and that we know that it isn't good for our health to be isolated. And I think, but it's harder in a pandemic. You say, most of us, I spent like 10 weeks kind of pretty much in my own apartment, not seeing anybody but my boyfriend, so that even seeing people, the casual acquaintances that make up our communities and our lives, were all taken away from us. So how can you stay connected? Well, we've of course all seen the pleasures of Zoom, and that it's hard work, but it is a way to see faces and connect. We all have that option, and a lot of us, I enjoy, actually, I grew up on the telephone. Maybe you did too. That's how we didn't grow up with Zoom. But so I think one of the ways we can stay connected is by calling people, and even making those calls part of your routine, that you're going to talk to your children or your sister or whatever. And if you say, well, Thursdays at 2, we'll do that. It gives, again, it tethers you and kind of gives you a sense that something to look forward to. And it really works well. So the last or next to last is to embrace the freedom. And by that, I mean, to sort of see that we do have this time that we've never had before, and that it gives us choices that you may never have had before and you may never have again. It's you have the choice to think about what you might want to do, what you have been too busy to be all these years. And I think all of us, we all say, oh, I'm so busy, I'm so busy, I'm so busy. But now we don't hear that so much. We're not so busy. And so we can really explore, and that's the last point here, explore some new possibilities that would never have occurred to us. And I think to take a life of, the risk is not to be getting the COVID, but to trying something new, to reaching out, to exploring sides of ourselves that never can be. I've discovered in my research that what is very interesting of what happens in terms of gender roles, that men, anyway, when they get to be in their 80s, are apt to explore the feminine side of themselves. There's men that are doing, you'll find men that are cooking and enjoying it and baking bread and doing all these things that they never did during their earlier adult life. And then women are doing just the opposite, are getting into politics and activism and kind of things that they were just not on the table. So it's a chance now to explore our sense of what's possible and see what it is that takes with us. So Ed, next slide, please. So with the short version of my lecture, that if you kind of take it into a one sentence or two, I'm saying that there is nothing to wait for. You know, we all tend to think we're waiting for the vaccine, we're waiting for the this, we're waiting for the that, waiting for the cases to go down. But that, I think that's an attitude that is not going to make you live a fulfilled life. So we've got to say, this is my life. There's nothing to wait for, that I'm living now. And I think that attitude of kind of a positive embrace of your life is going to pay off. And just as a kind of a funny statistic, if you have a positive sense about aging, people that have sort of do have good feelings about aging, those people live 7.6 years longer, according to recent research, than people that have attitudes of, oh, it's all terrible, like nothing to, it's a rag, I have nothing to look forward to. So there's nothing to wait for, live now. And the next slide, Ed. And I'm going to close this, and then we'll go on to questions and answers. And then we'll have a few more slides after the questions and answers. But another way to summarize, it's a quote I think that is a good guide for how to live a fulfilled life, is this quote here. We must be willing to let go of the life we had planned so as to have the life that is waiting for us. And so that's kind of as my last hope for you all, and for all of us, is that we do get a chance to explore the life that is waiting for us, and maybe even to be that person that we've always wanted to be, but never had time to be because we were so busy. And now I would like to move to the question and answer period. And Lillian was going to help with this, but I hope you'll not only ask questions, but I'd like to have you have comments. I'm writing blogs about aging. I'm really interested in what your experience has been, what you're worried about, what in the lecture or the talk here struck you, what didn't strike you, how you see things differently. So any comments that would be really welcome too. So I hope that you'll ask some questions, but make some comments.
Well, I think we will probably have a fair number of questions, and if not, I have at least 3. So I want to, Ed, if you could stop your screen share so we could get into a gallery view where we can see people. And you are now all muted. So when you ask a question, all you need to do is unmute yourself. So, and I will recognize you because I know I can see your names, but I can also call on you. So anyone have a question ready for Katharine? And first of all, let me just thank you so much, Katharine, because I have learned a great deal in this short period of time.
Good, thanks.
So anybody have a first question? No? Oh, come on now. You can think of, I'm sure you can think of some. All right, I'm going to start with a question then.
Okay.
Because, one of the things that you said, I was struck with what you said about, the fact that if people are retired or don't have a job, and to take advantage of the fact that you don't have to live by an alarm clock. You can just have whatever comes along. But that is somewhat, you juxtapose that very nicely by talking about routine. And so there's the balance of the question of whim, of what you want to do with your day, and building in a structure that allows you to do that. Do you have any sense about how people go about doing that?
Well, I think, some people you allow, I think there are people that are night owls, and and as an older person, they can live by that. I mean, I have certain friends you can't call before 10 o'clock in the morning. I'm the other kind of
That would
person.
be me.
Yeah, that you can do that without guilt, as you get older. And then I am up at 6. And so, I'm ready for lunch by 10 o'clock, so that but I think you can go by your own. So it works. But I do think there's a tension between, really some of my comments about working and the sense of being free from that. I do believe there's a tremendous pleasure in being free from the treadmill, but I also think there's a tremendous pleasure in having this purpose, and I think in working too. For me, it doesn't have to be paid work, but just the sense, I get enormous gratification out of that, and I've been shrinking my private practice, but it just, I think, to have some focus, it's something that you're doing. So these are somewhat in juxtaposition, but I do think Freud was right that, the two things that we really need to have a happy life, and putting in another sentence, is love and work. And it can be any kind of work, but somehow a contribution to the larger commonweal in some way is we need to do it for our